Good afternoon here. Another beautiful week in Minnesota. It actually was a really nice week. We've talked about weather. Weather seems to be a theme in every single one of these fishing reports. And I'll tell you what, this last week, the weather was phenomenal. We had beautiful weather, comfortable mornings. I actually put on hoodies many mornings to start the day, sweatpants, even gale, soft shell stuff. We had some mornings in the 40s, which is below average for middle of July. So we had a long stretch of a lot of above average heat. We know all about that. And then we actually kind of got back into a rhythm with some comfortable temperatures and even below average, and it felt good. And water temps dipped just a hair, not enough to make a major impact, but enough to feel good. It felt good on us. It felt good to be outside. It was nice for a change versus just sweltering heat. So that was kind of cool to see. We continue to find the fish in the same patterns. I've been predominantly bass fishing. That's pretty much what I've been doing here. I think where we live here in the Twin Cities, that gives us some of the best opportunity for not only quantity, but quality when we're talking species specific. I haven't done the muskie thing. Water temps cooled off a bit to where I saw some musk anglers back out on the water again. That was kind of cool. No pun intended. But otherwise, I've been chasing bass. We've got some pike. Haven't done the walleye thing at all this week. Didn't do any panfish, just predominantly went bass fishing and caught a bunch of different things. Did catch some pike, did catch a walleye, caught some sheephead, caught some crappies, even did some shore fishing yesterday with the boys, and I got some cool ideas for you if you're looking to do some shore fishing. Sometimes it's nice to do that and just kind of reset. If you're out in the boat a lot, or if you don't have a boat and you want to just go fishing, shore fishing can be really good. You can catch a lot of fish and have a lot of fun. You don't need a boat to get out there and catch fish and make it an enjoyable time. And I'll tell you some things on how we did yesterday and what worked for us. So to get started, I'm not going to beat the jig worm drop shot type stuff with a dead horse. I think you're well adversed on how we jig worm fish. Just put a video out here this week on exactly how I fish a jig worm. Check that out if you haven't seen it already. It's a few posts down here on my pages, and that's really how we're catching a lot of our fish. That's probably the most effective, easiest way to catch them right now. However, we're getting some big bites in other ways, and I want to show you some other summer tactics here to catch some fish. For starters, jig fishing. Pitching a jig, flipping a jig. Jack was using this exact setup multiple times this week and catching some fish, whether it's an AT jig, which is your standard just flipping, pitching jig, a skipping jig, a finesse jig. There's a variety of ways you can do it, but he was throwing 20-30 pound braid. We got a fluorocarbon leader on there and just pitching around your favorite jig of choice. And a lot of fun ways to catch fish. You can cast this in heavy cover. You can cast this on deeper weed lines. You can fish this setup a variety of different ways, whether you're just trying to catch bass, whether you're trying to fine-tune some skill sets. He was trying to get better at doing this kind of stuff, this style of fishing, and he actually caught some nice fish a couple times we were out this week throwing a jig. So a lot of guys and gals fish a jig. It's obviously nothing new in the bass world, but I would encourage you, if you're trying to get a little outside the box and not as complacent with the spinning rod, jig worm fishing, pitch a jig. It's fun. It can be effective, and there's nothing like that thump when you're working a jig and you feel that thud and you know you're going to set the hook into a fish. It's pretty fun way to catch them. So jig fishing is something I would consider, especially as we get more weeds here in the summer months and things get matted up and it gets gross. You can fish a jig, a weedless jig, and be really effective on bass. Another way we caught them this week on a couple different occasions was I turned to the crankbait. Now, I don't fish a lot of crankbaits, and it's not because they're not effective. It's because I'm generally taking clients out. I got 2 or 3 anglers in the boat chucking around all over the place. I don't like crankbaits flying around the boat. I just think it's more of a safety thing for me, and that's just kind of how I'm wired. But I was out a handful of times where I was throwing a crankbait, and I actually caught some of our nicer fish on a couple of different bodies of water throwing a DT series crankbait. This is a DT 16, and what that stands for is dives to 16 feet. So the DT series from Rapala is pretty diverse, everything from 3-foot divers to 20-foot divers, and this happens to be a DT 16 in that hot mustard color. That it's basically a hot bluegill, a flaming bluegill. You can see it's got a big yellow underbelly, orange lip there, and just a cool looking pattern to it. And there's a variety of different baits that work, or color patterns that work, but I was throwing this, I think they call it the Hot Mustard DT16, and you can see it's got a big bill on it there, so it dives down. And I'm a little unconventional when I fish crankbaits, and I'll tell you why. A lot of anglers will use a fluorocarbon or something to that effect. I actually fish a really light braid. I have a 10-pound braid on this line as my crankbait line, and people will ask me, why do I do that? Well, I do it for a number of reasons. One, I can get a little further cast on this than, let's say, with 12 or 14-pound fluorocarbon. The diameter of this 10-pound line is like 4-pound test. So when I'm throwing this crankbait, I can chuck this thing a country mile, it feels like. I can get a further cast. I also can dive deeper. So even though this says DT16, I can get this thing down 18, 20 feet because this thin diameter line cuts through the water and cuts through the water quicker. I also have a ton of sensitivity, so when I'm working this crankbait down, trying to hit the gravel and the rocks, I can feel way more with this braided line. Whether it's rocks, gravel, weeds, I can tell you immediately if my crankbait isn't swimming right. So this for me, this really thin braided line gives me the versatility and the ability to feel more, understand more what's going on, all that sort of stuff. And I'm using a pretty limber rod. This actual rod I'm fishing isn't made anymore. It's basically it's a long crankbait rod, basically a combination of graphite and glass, because I want that more parabolic bend. I'm not really setting the hook on a crankbait. I'm just reeling down and turning my body. Let the lure do the work. You're not really hammering down on a fish when you get a bite on a crankbait like you would a jig or a jig worm. So I'm using like a 7.5 foot, moderate powered rod that I can really just let the bait do the work and kind of snare that fish versus really setting the hook. So trying to deep diving crankbait, that's kind of a lot of fish for me this week as well. Super fun way to catch them. It's pretty entertaining when they crush that crankbait. And like I said, I'm using a thin diameter braid. Has caught some fish. So those are some additional ways we're catching our bass right now, on top of everything we've talked about the last couple of weeks. I would say if you go back and watch the last few fishing reports here, all of that information is going to be consistent as well right now. I'm just going to try to throw some additional things at you on top of jig worms and wacky rigs and drop shots and everything we've talked about for a few weeks. Not that doesn't catch fish, and that might still be my go-to, but here are some other ways I'm getting some fish to bite if you want to try some different tactics. So the bite's still consistent. It's on that weed line. We're catching a lot of fish in 15 to 18 feet of water, even as deep as 25, depending on the lake, clarity, water type, weed growth. Some lakes like Tonka right now, I'm getting fish deep, 24, 25, 26 feet of water out in the coontail. And then other lakes like Chisago Chain and some lakes like that, I'm getting them as shallow as 5, 6, 7 feet still. That's where the good, heavy, thick clumps of weeds are. So it depends on the body of water. If somebody asks me, hey, how deep are you fishing? First question I'm going to fire back at you is, where are you fishing? What lake? What's the visibility like? What's the weed growth like? Because all that plays a factor. It's not just a consistent depth range, no matter where you're fishing in the metro. You've seen all types of water here in the Twin Cities. So where you're fishing, what's the water like? What's the weed growth like? All those variables can come into play on how deep you're going to be targeting your bass. Cool. So getting into some shore fishing tactics. We had a lot of fun. Me and the boys walked the shore. We walked the Mississippi. We walked the Rum, chasing smallmouth and just kind of covering water. And for that, I'm using a spinning rod. I leave the bait casters at home. I'm bushwhacking and I'm walking through. I'm carrying my rod, trying to dodge branches, and I'm just using like a 6'6" medium action spinning rod. I put some 20-pound braid on there, and I got about an 8 or 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. That to me is just very versatile. Ben and Jack were throwing chatterbaits and spinnerbaits. I was just throwing light wire. I went back to a lead jig head. That's that sassy Stingham jig head from Mr. Twister. I put the tungsten jig head away because I don't want it to fall as fast. So I went to a lead style jig head and I put on that sassy swimmer. We've talked about this before for the walleye fishing, just being versatile. And that's what I did. I just put that thing on and I'm covering water. I'm just fan casting, I'm having fun, I'm going back to my roots. It was a blast. I put on shorts and flip-flops or Crocs, even a swimsuit, and we just walk the shoreline of the Mississippi and the Rum and whatever we can find. We hit a handful of different spots from Ramsey down to Champlin, and just hit some old stomping grounds. Super fun way to fish. You don't know what you're going to catch, whether it's a smallmouth bass, a northern pike, a walleye. There's all kinds of stuff in those bodies of water, and shore fishing can be a lot of fun. It can be really comforting, rewarding, and help you just kind of reset the system. So yesterday evening, that's what I did with 2 of my boys. Just went shore fishing. Didn't overthink it. Super simple. We always joke, stupid simple, simple stupid, whatever. And that's what we did. We just went out there fan casting with spinning rods, had a blast, got in the water. It's pretty fun way to catch some fish in the summer, and it's very effective because you can just wade the shoreline. So versus having to find spots to get down because you're limited, I would encourage you to put on a pair of shorts or swim trunks and a pair of shoes you don't care about, or flip-flops or Crocs, and just walk in the water, thigh on down type depth, and just, you can walk literally down the river as long as you want, as you're comfortable casting and trying to catch a fish. So shore fishing can be fun. It's a good time of year to do it because the temperatures are right, and you never know what you're going to catch. With smallmouth bass, like I said, we caught those, we caught pike, we even caught walleye. So everything's kind of relating to the rocks, the cut banks, all that kind of stuff, and you just keep casting. You never know what's around the next bend. You never know what could bite, and when you least expect it, you seem to catch a fish. And we had a lot of fun, and it build memories with the family, with the boys, or with your buddies. So I oftentimes like to just leave the boat in the driveway, grab the spinning rods, and walk the bank, and you never know what you're going to catch. So especially on the river, sometimes it can be better to be on shore than out in a boat. So have some fun catching fish doing that. Otherwise, yeah, we're going to get after it again this week. I continue to expect to see very similar patterns and conditions to what we just caught and talked about. I envision when we talk next week, you'll hear the same thing. I am going to be flying out next Sunday to Orlando for iCast, so there's a good chance you won't have a fishing report from me next week. I will be fishing this week here in the cities, and then I'm gone for a week to sunny Florida to see some of the newest, latest, and greatest fishing gear. So get out there, chase down some fish, have some fun. Hopefully your summer is in full swing and you're enjoying it with the family and friends and catching fish and having barbecues and going swimming and all that good stuff. So get out there, chase down some fish, save some for me, and we'll catch you next time.